Mr. Andre said, follow me. So we go up the aisle, and I saw at the end of the room, seated behind a big desk, a man in a blue pinstripe suit with dark gray hair, a very round face, ruddy complexion, looking like a man who just had the massaging that brought blood to his skin. Florid look. And he had one shoe up on the desk, and it was a polished black shoe. And he was leaning back in a big chair, and he saw me coming into the room following Mr. Herb Andre. And he saw me, and he said, oh, good afternoon, young man. Why don't you have a seat here? And Mr. Andre said, sit here. And Mr. Andre took a seat further away. And Mr. Talese, Turner Talese, looked at me. Well, he said, what brings you to New York? Oh, Mr. Talese, I'm interested in journalism. I work for the college newspaper and a high school newspaper. I love to be a writer. I love to be a reporter. I hope someday I can work for the New York Times. Oh, he said, young man, you have to have a lot of experience to work for the New York Times. I know Mr. By the way, he said, why are you here? I said, I came here because I was told when I was a student last year at the University of Alabama, one of my classmates is your cousin. You looked at me, my cousin? Yes, Mr. Talese. Well, who might that cousin be? I said, well, his name is James Pinkston. He's from Mississippi, as you are. I don't know any James Pinkston. I said, well, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed, and I was also confused. Because I didn't know what to think. And he said, well, let me tell you, I have only another minute. I know you're interested, but you have to get a lot of experience. And what are people usually? These people that work for us, they work for the Philadelphia paper, they work for the Cincinnati paper, they work for the other papers, big time papers, daily papers. Then they get experience, work for a smaller daily newspaper. And when you get experience, reapply, and we'll judge you then. I said, well, is there any low-level job here? Like a clerk or a copy boy? I knew there were copy boys. Mr. Talese looked at Herb Andre. Are there any openings in the copy boys? Mr. Andre said, no, they're all we filled, Mr. Talese. Well, Mr. Talese was sort of sympathetic, even though he didn't know my cousin. He didn't know his own cousin. But he said, well, look, leave your phone number with Mr. Andre. And if anything happens, we'll call you. Oh, well, thank you, sir. But I thought this is hopeless. I got up, and I thanked him for seeing me, Mr. Talese. And I walked out with Mr. Andre. He said, well, give me your phone number, and I wrote it down. Then he took me out to the reception room, and I thanked him for seeing me. I thanked the receptionist who was still there. I took the elevator down from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor. I walked 2 blocks to the bus station. I got on the bus, headed back home. And as soon as the bus left for New Jersey, to Ocean City. And on that ride back, I thought, well, that's the end of my career. I was going to write that cousin, I thought, forget it, in Alabama, Mississippi. 2 weeks later, in my mother's dress shop, phone. Is Gay Talese there? And my mother answered the phone. Who's calling? This is Mr. Herb Andre. She said, just a minute, please, Mr. Andre. I was there in the store. I came to the phone. He says, you know, there is an opening. A copy boy opening. There's not much money. I want you to know that. But there is an opening. When can you come? I said, come this afternoon. No, we don't want you this afternoon. Can you come next week? Yes. So next week I got on the bus and went back and got a job as a copy boy. Copy boy, as you may know, is really an errand boy, a servant. You go out for sandwiches, you get coffee, you go to the cafeteria, bring the coffee down for the editors, you get them sandwich, whatever they want. You run errands, they have messages delivered to different floors. The New York Times has 14 floors. And so I would, beginning then, in the summer of 1953, 4 months after I graduated from college at Alabama, I began a career within the building of the New York Times as a copy boy, the lowest level of job. And my job consisted of not only going to the cafeteria and getting whatever editors and reporters wanted, but it also meant that I had to deliver messages that came from foreign capitals, cables, we called them then, and they were put on mimeograph machines to duplicate them. So the Foreign Bureau in Berlin, or the Foreign Bureau in Rome, or the Foreign Bureau in Athens, or the Foreign Bureau in Tokyo, or the Foreign Bureau in London, wherever, Africa, they would send these cables and someone in a mimeograph in many cases. And my job was to take 11 copies of each cable, each story, to the 11 most important people in the building. Who were they? There was the publisher on the 14th floor, was one of them. There was the editorial editor on the 10th floor, which the editorial, where the editorial writers, the ivory tower. There was also, on the 8th floor, the Sunday magazine, Sunday section. The editor of the Sunday section was an important person. He got a copy of everything. Every cable, every kind of foreign, every copy went to these key editors, including the editor of advertising on the 2nd floor, including, of course, the assistant managing editor and the manager. They all got theirs first on the 3rd floor, which was the newsroom. And what I gained from going from floor to floor, day after day, as an observer, as a young observing man, I got to see where the power was. It wasn't only on the walls of those long ago editors in Mr. Talese's office, or those former publishers in the reception room who were the owners of the paper, the family owners of the paper. But now I'm seeing in real lifetime, I'm seeing the Sunday editor, I'm seeing the editorial editor-in-chief, I'm seeing the publisher's secretary, the publisher himself sometimes, as he walked in and out. I'm seeing sometimes the publisher's wife as she came in and out to visit him, and she was a stockholder in the paper. And I'm seeing sometimes when they have a union, they have a meeting of the boards of directors. They met in the 14th floor, a big conference room. And sometimes I'd sneak to look at them. I saw who the directors were. I didn't say hello to them, but I knew from their faces, the way they dressed, I got a sense of people who worked day after day in different capacities. Advertising has made reference, sold advertising, sold ads, to people who gave the voice on the editorial page to opinion makers, which was allowed in the editorial, but not in the newsroom. That was not, that was news, factual. It was not something objective, not opinionated. So, the first year I did that. Later on, I went to the Army, and later on I came back. Later on I became a reporter, and I became a reporter for 10 years, and I wrote stories for the New York Times of the kind that I described. Ordinary people. I singled out those people, and sometimes the New York Times would publish what I wrote. And sometimes it didn't publish what I wrote. It was explained they're not newsworthy enough, they're not newsy enough. It has to be news, news, news. But some of the stories I wrote were very publishable, and some of them were very good. And some of them weren't published. When I got 1 or 2 or 3 published, some people commented, they're well done. Yes, they're not famous people, but they're what? Maybe you should do another one. I did another one. I did another one. I did another one. Little by little, I was gaining a reputation as a reporter whose eye for detail was different from the ordinary news reporter. Because the news reporter was waiting for news to happen and then to go out and cover it. As did the rival newspapers cover news. What was news? Maybe a murder, or fire, or some kind of economic disaster, or maybe a story of a suicide jumping out of a building, or a plane crash hitting a part of Manhattan. These are news stories. Anybody can cover that. You cover the news. But I was writing about maybe people where there's a plane crash, how it affected the ordinary barbershop in the store. I would take different characters. They might be connected to the news event, they might not. But little by little, my stories were given a kind of credibility because they were well written. They were stories. They were stories told from the vantage point of an ordinary young person in a town who was curious about people, and I was curious about people nonetheless when I became a reporter. And I was able to understand that news doesn't necessarily mean people who are newsworthy, people who are famous, people who are topical. It could be, if you write it well enough, it could be anybody, because they're stories, just like fiction writers write stories of ordinary people. Tolstoy wrote about ordinary people. So did the great American novels, F. Scott Fitzgerald, or modern writers like Carson McCullers. Ordinary people. They made them extraordinary because they wrote them so beautifully. Arthur Miller, the greatest playwright of my lifetime, wrote an internationally famous play. What's it called? Death of a Salesman. Who's the main character? An ordinary person, a salesman, a not good salesman, a bad salesman, named Willie Loman. So a playwright writes about an ordinary person on a Broadway stage in a spectacular play that had no news, but it was a play about life. And that play is translated into every language in the world. Years ago, I was in China. I saw Death of a Salesman in Mandarin in Beijing. So I was getting, early in life, the understanding that stories can be anybody's story. It needn't be a newsworthy. It could be anybody if it's done well enough. And as I practiced more and more, I wrote better and better, to the point, after I had turned 30, 31, I decided I want to leave the newspaper. I wanted more room. I wanted to write longer stuff. So I left at 31. I worked a year doing long magazine pieces, and after 1 year I stopped that. I started writing books, little books, bigger books. And all that I wrote was basically my sensibility that had been formed when I was 15, 16 years old, 14 years old, 10 years old, realizing that even a little